really delighted to have with us on this rainy Monday evening the former U.S. Attorney, Geoffrey Berman, here to talk about his revealing new book, Holding the Line, Inside the Nation's Preeminent U.S. Attorney's Office and Its Battle with the Trump Justice Department. Jeff's a former U.S. Attorney for the Southern District of New York, a post he held during the Trump administration from early 2018 to mid-2020. It's a very powerful position, of course, renowned for its independence and responsible over many years for some of the country's most important prosecutions. Earlier in his career, Jeff also served in the Southern District as an assistant U.S. attorney, so he knew how the office was supposed to operate when he took over the top position there, but his experience ended up being, as with many things under Trump, quite a departure from the norm. Like his predecessors, Jeff, during his time as U.S. attorney, pursued a number of high-profile cases against such figures as Chris Collins, the congressman who pleaded guilty to insider trading, Michael Cohen, Trump's former lawyer, and Jeffrey Epstein, the notorious sex trafficker. Jeff also oversaw prosecutions against the Turkish bank, Halkbank, for conspiring to violate sanctions against Iran, the New York Housing Authority for horribly poor conditions, and a drug gang known as Nine Trey. And Jeff writes about these and other cases to show how things are supposed to work in the U.S. Attorney's Office, that is, when prosecutors are allowed to do their jobs without political interference. But then under Trump, there were other situations which aren't supposed to happen. And Jeff writes about these two instances during his 2.5 years in the Southern District when he received demands from the Department of Justice to help Trump's friends and punish Trump's enemies. This pressure, Jeff says, he resisted in ways just tactful enough to avoid being fired until his luck finally expired and he was pushed out in June 2020. Jeff's book, as the Washington Post reviewer said, provides a cautionary tale about how political forces can undermine the quest for justice. And it does so, I'll just add, in a very lively and engaging prose. In conversation with Jeff will be Jan Crawford, who many of you may recognize as the chief legal correspondent for CBS News. Jan herself's a law school graduate and the author 15 years ago of a best-selling book about the Supreme Court, Supreme Conflict. So she also has lots of experience identifying what's normal in our justice system and what isn't. So ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming Geoffrey Berman and Jan Crawford.
Good evening. Thank you, Brad, for that introduction.
This is on, right? Okay. Oh, sorry.
I got it. Oh, boy. Not so easy to bend anymore.
Such a gentleman. I'm always used to holding these for television when it's raining and windy, so I'll just pretend like the elements are here as well. And thank you. Speaking of the weather, thank you all so much for coming out tonight. I just want to say a special thank you to you as well, Brad, because we were talking, Jeff and I were back in the office about what a jewel, and of course we'll get to what a jewel the Southern District of New York is, where Jeff did his best to persevere for justice. But this is such a jewel to have, not only in Washington, D.C., but it's a more rare thing to have a bookstore like this, and certainly in our neighborhood. We are so lucky. So I want to just say, as someone who obviously we all love books, and it's thank you. So keep up the good fight. And that's going to, yeah, thanks. And that's kind of going to be our focus tonight, is kind of how you keep up that good fight when you feel that all is working against you and pressures are being brought to bear, that you have the sense or not the way that things should be done. And so it's my pleasure to be able to speak with Jeff Berman for about 20-25 minutes, I think we have, and then we're going to let you guys take over and ask questions as well. I enjoyed reading this book. It was one that you're not going to want to do the Washington read and look in the back of the index and try to pick things. I highly suggest you start from the beginning. It's written, as Brad said, in a very conversational tone. So you just I feel like I've been talking to you now for the last week or so, hearing your side of the story and your sense of things, because it really does feel like you're a masterful storyteller.
Oh, thank you very much. My wife, who's sick of my voice at this point, I actually
at this point,
early, but I actually I recorded the book for Audible, which took like a week of solid recording, and it's the horrible, brutal experience. But and my wife told me to do it because she likes to, when she listens to books, she likes the author to read it, and so if you that's what people have said, is that it's like having a conversation with me by listening to the book.
Yeah, so it is. I mean, it's very engaging book, so I recommend it. And you're going to
except I do all the talking. It's a conversation, but it's very one-sided.
One of the things I'd like to just kind of start with, because I thought, and this is toward the back of your book, after you've been through the storm and a lot of weathered a lot, is you look back to when you were a little boy, 6 years old, growing up in Trenton, New Jersey. And that was the first time, you say, that you had a real sense of what being a lawyer could be and what it could mean. Why don't we just start by going way back? Tell us that story and how that really shaped not only your career, but your decision in writing this book.
Sure. I was about 6 years old, and we grew up in Trenton, New Jersey. I don't know if anyone here is familiar with Trenton, but it has an old Italian neighborhood called Chambersburg. And every Sunday night, our family would go to Di Lorenzo's Tomato Pies, which was in Chambersburg. And, for 20 years, we did, that was our ritual. And one night
a tomato pie is a pizza.
Okay. That's heresy. That's heresy. Although I lived in Washington and I went to Vace. I don't know how many people go to Vace. That's excellent. That's excellent pizza.
Okay.
No, I loved it. And it's as close as I've tasted to a tomato pie in D.C. And I don't know the magic that goes into the differentiating, but in Trenton, it's tomato pie, and no one uses the word pizza. And so we were walking to the restaurant. It's a old row houses. It was based on the Roebling factory was there, and so the row houses were built for the workers in the Roebling factory, and it's very picturesque. And we were walking one night to pizza, and then a woman shouts from one of the porches, in a very thick Italian accent, "Thank you, Mr. Berman." And then another woman shouts, "Thank you, Mr. Berman," and then we're continue to walk, and one woman brings out a pasta, a rigatoni dish, and gave it to my father and said, "Thank you very much." And I turned to him and I said, "Why are they thanking you?" He said, "Well, I represented them in a zoning issue that was before the Trenton City Council, and we won, and they were just very grateful." And so I think that was my first understanding of what lawyers do. My father was a lawyer in Trenton. He had a small firm, and he practiced a lot of land use, and so it gave me an appreciation for what lawyers do and the good they could do in a community. I think it's one of the things that propelled me into that kind of career.
What made
and the pasta was unbelievable. So it was not only a profession where you could do good. It's a profession where you could eat well.
How did that influence your decision to be a lawyer? Obviously, Or
you know,
did it? I
it
mean,
did. I mean, I saw, you know, he was a person of incredible integrity, and he always did things by the book, and he approached the practice of law with a sense of commitment, but also a sense of humor, and I respected that, and I think that's what propelled me into it, and I found that public service is the most rewarding aspect of being a lawyer, and so I've been in and out of public service my entire career.
And why the Southern District as an AUSA, as a prosecutor?
Well,
Before, of course.
you know, I clerked
Mm-hmm.
right out of law school, and then my first job as a prosecutor was actually in Iran Contra. That was
For
under
Judge
Lawrence Walsh, and I was a very young prosecutor at that time. It was like the late '80s, and I got to know a lot of people who were my friends for a very long time. So Bill Traynor, and Bill is not here tonight, so he's not that good a friend, but he's his Allison, his wife, is here. That's very nice of her to be here. But he's now the dean of Georgetown Law School, and he not only has been a friend for a very long time, but as I say in the book, when I thought I was going to have to bring suit against Bill Barr for firing me on the grounds that I couldn't be fired because I was court appointed, I turned to Bill for legal advice, and you know, and he couldn't help but give a little dig. So the legal issue, it was whether, and you'll be familiar with this, is whether I was an officer under the Constitution or an inferior officer. And if I was an inferior officer, it meant the court could appoint me, that it would be constitutionally appropriate, and then the argument could be made if a court appointed me, only the court could fire me. But Bill was so adamant, he said, no, Jeff, you're a very inferior officer. And he wouldn't let it go. So anyway, so I met Bill at the Iran-Contra, Audrey Strauss, who then went on to succeed me as United States Attorney. I met on Iran.
Trusted advisor throughout.
Yes. As was Rob Kazami, who's in the audience, the first deputy at the office. And then there were so many people on Iran, but the lesson I learned from Iran-Contra, I was a Republican. I've been a Republican my whole life. But, you know, even though it was a Republican administration under investigation, you leave your party affiliation at the door. The cardinal rule of the Department of Justice is that partisan political concerns, you know, are not taken into account in any decision making. So, you know, that's a lesson I learned on Iran-Contra. And then there were so many Iran-Contra prosecutors who came from the Southern District, it was a natural jumping off point for me. Like Audrey was an example of a former Southern District prosecutor who Walsh hired on Iran-Contra.
And talk a little bit about, I mean, obviously it's one of 94 offices, but it is the crown jewel. What makes the Southern District of New York for U.S. attorneys so special? And I mean, the sovereign, how many, what other words do you want to describe it? But
well, preeminent, that's in the title of the book. It's a
but
preeminent.
It's also the sovereign district.
Yes, sovereign district they've used. You know, and in the Department of Justice, they refer to the Southern District always as the frickin' Southern District. So we have a lot of names. But what makes it extraordinary, it's hard to capture it in a bottle. You know, if you could capture it, boy, people would have. But I think it's a combination.
That we should try to capture. It shouldn't.
Yeah.
It's unfortunate that it is distinct in its excellence.
Well, when people say, you know, what makes the Southern District so special, I respond, hey, we should be the norm. Every other U.S. Attorney's office should be doing what the Southern District does. But I think what makes it special is it's on the foot of Wall Street. And so we have access and venue for almost any financial crime in the country that's committed. That money is bound to move through a New York bank. On terrorism, unfortunately, with the history of New York and terrorism, we've got one of the, you know, the most experienced and knowledgeable national securities. Rob Kazami was on the blind shake trial. So, public corruption, is not unheard of in New York. So we've got a very strong
I have read a
office
few
there.
stories about that.
So, and then you add on to that the fact that we have venue in all these important cases, the quality and the excellence of the AUSAs who come to work in the office.
Such as yourself.
Well, I believe me, I don't, I can't compare. When I was a junior AUSA, there were just spectacular people in the office. So, so a combination of the hardworking brilliance of the lawyers combined with venue over so many important cases, I think that combination is pretty great. And there's a constant turnover, meaning it's a very young office. So there are a lot of U.S. attorneys' offices, where the major problem is, keeping the people who have been there for many, many years, decades, actively engaged. And in the Southern District, it's generally a very young office. So, they come motivated and they work very hard.
Let me just ask you one final question about that story when you were 6. That sense that lawyers could do good and had an obligation in some sense that they could do good things. That sense seems to come through in this book. The sense you had that inappropriate pressure was being brought to bear on your office and on you specifically to reward Trump's friends and punish his enemies. And you write that started pretty early on, before Bill Barr.
Yeah, Bill Barr didn't start it. But
let's talk about something in the preface, and obviously it involves someone in the audience where you were told even things out.
Right. So that's that was the
Greg. That more in chapter 4.
Yes, that's the Greg Craig case. Greg Craig is a prominent Democrat. He was White House counsel for President Obama, and we were investigating him for FARA-related charges, the Foreign Agent Registration Act. And, which
is not very commonly used, more so in the wake of Trump, against.
Right. I mean, it was not a frequently invoked statute, but we were taking the case seriously and we were investigating it. And we get pushed by Maine Justice to indict Greg Craig prior to the midterm elections, that we had just indicted 2 allies of President Trump, Chris Collins, who is a Republican congressman from upstate New York, Trump's earliest backer in the Congress, and Michael Cohen, the president's lawyer and fixer. We had just indicted those 2 allies of the president. Now it was time for us to even things out by indicting a Democrat before the midterm elections. It was just outrageous, unbelievable violation of the cardinal rule of the Department of Justice. And we didn't pay attention to it. And we investigated the case against Greg Craig, and there, it was an extremely weak case. It was not appropriate to bring an indictment. And so we declined the case. And but the Department of Justice didn't take no for an answer. They then transferred the case to the District of Columbia, which indicted Greg Craig. I'll note that it indicted Greg Craig. At that point, Barr was the Attorney General prior to the indictment in the District of Columbia. And it went to trial, and Greg Craig was acquitted by the jury in less than 5 hours. Case should never have been brought.
Do you think that the U.S. Attorney here in D.C., who's Jessie Liu then, right, did she cave to that pressure? I mean, does that violate DOJ rules?
I spoke to Jessie before she made the decision to indict. I tried to convince her not to bring the case, that it was inappropriate, it was too weak, and would not withstand the scrutiny of a jury, and I was unsuccessful.
But do you think she caved to pressure?
I think only Jessie Liu can answer that.
When we think about, that was early on, and I guess when was that? Pretty.
So,
The
it
midterms
was
were in-
the midterms. It was 2018, November 2018, and this would have been September. Was the the mid-September was the push by Main Justice to even things out.
Yeah.
And the Collins indictment and the and Michael Cohen's plea were both in August of 2018.
There was another, and there's news in this book. I didn't know about the investigation into John Kerry. So as you can see, obviously.
Well, John Kerry was the other egregious example of Main Justice of Main Justice doing the bidding of Donald Trump and targeting Trump's political enemies. And so
at the time, and if you think back, if you remember, before he got booted off Twitter, the president liked to tweet a lot, and he began a series of tweets that John Kerry, in his opinion, was violating an obscure statute that had only been used twice, most recently in the 1800s.
Used twice and never successfully.
Never successful, only 2 indictments.
It was enacted in 1799, so in about 220 years, there were no criminal convictions.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the statute that Main Justice wanted us to use. They referred the case to our office the day after 2 tweets by Trump, where he attacked John Kerry, saying that Kerry had engaged in possible illegal conversations with Iranian officials regarding the Iran nuclear deal. The very next day, Main Justice refers the John Kerry criminal case to the Southern District of New York. So 2 tweets from the president and the John Kerry criminal case becomes a priority for the Department of Justice.
And the allegation would have been that he was violating something called the Logan Act, which is obviously only been used twice, and most recently in the 1800s because it's of dubious constitutionality.
Yeah, I mean, it seems very clear that it's unconstitutional, and we investigated this case fully. John Kerry was entirely innocent, and when I declined to prosecute the case, and this was Bill Barr didn't take no for an answer. He then transferred the case to another district, just as he did with Greg Craig. Well, just as was done with Greg Craig, and thankfully that other district didn't indict either. The U.S. attorney there, called me up and we talked about the case, and I went through the reasoning why we declined, and he agreed.
One thing I thought was notable about that, though, is that your office did spend a fair amount of time with that case. You looked into it. You didn't just say, well, this is ridiculous.
No, but Southern District doesn't do that.
Mm-hmm.
If we get referred a case from Main Justice, there's no U.S. attorney better situated to investigate a case involving national security than the Southern District of New York, and we're going to give it the time and attention it deserves.
And
we don't prejudge things.
And in that case, I was surprised that I don't think that had not been public. Did the Justice Department give you any pushback in you making that public, that it had been investigated?
Well, so one of the things.
How did you get them to?
Right.
Let
So
you write about
I'll
that?
go through the whole the chronology of that. Present and former DOJ officials and employees are restricted from what they can say publicly. They're not allowed to talk about investigations or cases or conversations with other Department of Justice employees. And so when I testified before Congress right after my firing, I was not permitted to talk about these things by the ethics officer of the Southern District, and which I also ran by the ethics officer at Main Justice. But there is a process called pre-publication review. So if a present or former Department of Justice official wants to publish something, they submit it to the Department of Justice, and it goes through this pre-publication review. That's the way to do it, and that's what I pursued with the book. And so you'll notice in the book, I don't talk about any case in which someone was a target who was not ultimately indicted because that's against DOJ policy and it's not fair to the person. The only exception is with John Kerry, and I reached out to him prior to submitting it to pre-publication review to make sure that he had no objections, and he did not.
And what do you think that story, and he probably, I mean, I don't want to put words in his mouth or yours, but that was important to be in the book because...
Well, there are two main instances of DOJ going after political enemies of the president, and one was John Kerry, and the other was Greg Craig.
Mm-hmm. When we think about, and there are multiple instances that you detail in the book, and unfortunately we don't have 8 hours to go through all of them. It seems like the takeaway becomes very clear, what you've dealt with and what you've experienced. And I hate to just jump right to your firing, but at some point...
Do we have to talk about the firing now?
We'll wait and let you guys ask him about that.
It's still a little traumatic.
Let's just talk some more about Trump. Right. I do want to ask you one thing. So Maggie Haberman, and obviously she has a new book out about Trump, and she'll be here Friday. Yes. So, and has the same editor, so as Jeff did, and as I did for my book. She said, I saw today that she said, and I haven't read her book yet, that. She asked Trump if he would be facing the same legal troubles if Robert Morgenthau, who was once the U.S. Attorney for the Southern District before becoming the Manhattan District Attorney, were still in office. Would Trump have gotten in trouble in New York if Robert Morgenthau was still the DA? And his answer was no, because Morgenthau was, quote, a friend of mine. Now, Maggie said that's revealing because it shows Trump's view that prosecutors are supposed to do his bidding.
Yeah, no, I don't think that's true at all as far as Bob Morgenthau goes. I got to know Bob Morgenthau a little when I was U.S. Attorney. He was, as you say, a former U.S. Attorney for the Southern District and then spent decades as Manhattan DA. And, he just, impressed me as a person of incredible integrity, and I don't think for a second that he would put his thumb on the scale of a case involving Donald Trump, but it is revealing as far as how Donald Trump views law enforcement, the Department of Justice. If they're friends, and you don't go after your friends, and of course that's anathema to how things are supposed to work. And
finally, Trump had enough with you.
Right, although, he did fire me, but I don't know if any of you remember. He was asked right afterwards, well, why did you fire Berman? And he said, oh, I had nothing to do with that. That was Barr. So he distanced himself pretty quickly from that. But
maybe he was caught off guard by you didn't go very quietly.
No, I didn't. I didn't go quietly because the U.S. Attorney's Office in the Southern District was in danger. And it was in danger because Barr was going to put somebody in charge who he trusted from the outside. The same thing he did in the District of Columbia when Jesse Liu took a job with Treasury and he put in Tim Shea, who was a Barr ally. And then it was like a hostile takeover of the District of Columbia U.S. Attorney's Office by Main Justice. And I couldn't allow that to happen in the Southern District. And so I shot back, that same night where he said I was stepping down,
let's back up because there's quite a dramatic scene in the Pierre Hotel of how this went down.
Yeah, well, I'm invited to lunch with the Attorney General at the Pierre Hotel. I don't know how many people here know the Pierre Hotel. It's a very swanky place. He had a suite. Why he needed a suite in New York City when there were like 500,000 square feet of office space federally owned. But, I went up there and, there were sandwiches were laid out. Nobody ate the sandwiches. And he got right to the point. He wanted me to take another job, to step down. And, he offered me the chief of the civil division at the Department of Justice. And I knew at that point, I knew exactly what was happening. He had no intention of replacing me with my deputy at the time, who was Audrey Strauss. He was going to do exactly what he did in D.C. This was the same playbook. You know, everyone says how bright he is. He's not that creative. He does the same thing repetitively. And so I told him, I'm not taking that job. I'm going to see through the sensitive investigations that we're handling. And, you know, I declined. He then, you know, threatened me with, you know, my livelihood. He basically said, well, he held out a carrot. If you take the job, head of the civil division, you'll be able to build a bigger book of business when you go out into the private sector. And
You'll get a lot of clients.
Yeah, get a lot of clients. And I, you know, I declined to take the job. And then he said, well, you know, if you don't take the job, you're going to get fired, and that's not going to be good for your resume. You know, that was, I thought, a little thuggish, but I told him no.
Wrong on that too.
No, as it turns out. So, you know, but then, you know, so I said no to all these jobs. And I thought that was, you know, we were supposed to talk again, I think, on Monday. And that was the end of the conversation for that day. And then
you said you'd think about, I mean, you said you weren't going to.
I didn't say I'd think about it. I said, I'm not resigning. I said, you know, when we left, I said, let me set your expectations. I said this very specifically. I'm not taking another job. You know, so there was no confusion when I left the Pierre, and I didn't take with me one of the sandwiches, which my mother, it's the only criticism she had of me, was that I didn't take it for later. But
well, and you could have got one for your wife too, because then she met you and you told her the whole story.
Right.
So
can you imagine what he, you know, I didn't want to deal with his look. Yeah, just with can you imagine me taking his sandwich and my sandwich? So, but my wife and I drove home, and as we're almost getting into the driveway, our phones start lighting up. And we can't understand what it is. And she looks, and people are saying, oh my God, is Jeff okay? You know, what's going on? And then she looks online, and she sees Barr's press release saying that I had stepped down, which I didn't, and that I was being replaced immediately by Craig Carpenito, who is the U.S. Attorney for the District of New Jersey, who's an outsider who Barr trusted, who's going to take over the Southern District of New York. So he's going to be both the U.S. Attorney from New Jersey and the U.S. Attorney of the Southern District of New York, you know, which the Southern District of New York U.S. Attorney is not a part-time job, but that's what Barr had in mind. And then I responded with my own press release. You know, he was going to talk to me by press release. I responded by press release. And I said, basically, you know, he lied when he said that I was stepping down. I had no intention of stepping down, and that I was going to, you know, see through the cases of the Southern District. And I used the language of the obstruction of justice statute. I said, our cases are going to continue unimpeded and not delayed. And I think that
Which
shot
was a message.
Oh, that was yeah. I don't know anyone who left. You know, I don't know if anyone ever sent a press release out like that when they were told they were stepping down, but it was a shot across Barr's bow. You know, I think it was actually a shot possibly in the bow. And but it did the trick. I knew at that point I was going to be fired. You know, because that
accomplished something.
It did accomplish something, because he responded and he retreated in a press release the next day when he said, you know, Berman is fired. The president told me to fire you, but you're going to be replaced by Audrey Strauss, you know, your deputy, a person of incredible integrity, as opposed to Carpenito from New Jersey. And had he not done that, had he maintained the Carpenito, then I would have gone to court with Bill Traynor. That's right, with Dean Traynor. Does he insist on being called Dean? Oh. even his wife, Allison,
That's
has to
when you
call him
say you
Dean.
need to stop talking, dear.
So I would have gone to court with the help of my lawyers and fought it, but there was no need because once I knew the Southern District was in good hands, at that point I left.
Was there a line, and just reading through the book, it just kept coming to me over and over. Was there pressure? And I understand you were under some restrictions on what you can talk about, what went through review and what didn't. But did you ever feel pressure not to indict Donald Trump? Did you ever? Why? My bottom line is, why was Trump not indicted?
All right. So as I said, there's no discussion in the book of anyone who was investigated and not indicted, because that would violate the Department of Justice policy rules and
except John Kerry
would not be fair, except for John Kerry, who I got approval from in advance. Every case has to be viewed individually. And even though there may be evidence that supports the prosecution of person A, that doesn't mean that same evidence can be used and introduced with equal force for person B. And so I think that's, every case is viewed individually. The Southern District of New York does not pull punches. If there was a case to be made, a case would have been made. And I should point out that I was recused from the Cohen case and, the cases that grew out of Cohen. There was a point when the case...
and that's because you had worked on the Trump campaign.
Right.
Initially.
And I felt the kind of excess of caution to be recused.
So let me finish the one with the... So it wasn't a situation, though, where like you thought about going to DOJ IG, or you wanted to bring charges against Trump. You were pressured not to. You would have taken that further, I assume.
Well, again, I was recused but the Southern District, I can assure you the Southern District, if there was a case to be brought, it would have brought a case.
All right.
And by the way, there was a change in administration. The prosecution team was still in place. Audrey Strauss was still in place, and Merrick Garland was in place. And there had, if there was a case to be brought, the Southern District would have brought it.
I know I've gone way past my allotted time, and it's time for you guys to ask questions. So I've now run out of time to ask all mine. But I wanted to just kind of finish up with something we were talking about, going back to how we started with your father and the lessons that you learned from him. And he passed in August.
In August 2018.
Yeah. But he was able to see you.
Yes, he saw me sworn in as U.S. Attorney for the Southern District. He was very proud. My mother was very proud, and he lived through the Chris Collins indictment for insider trading, which was in early August, and then he passed away at the end of August after being ill for a very long time. But I was just very happy and grateful he was able to, to see that and share that with me.
Did you think about him when you were going through some of these episodes of intense pressure, or even when you were writing your book, making the decision to write the book?
Yes. I mean, he was a person, as I said, of enormous integrity and honesty, and he was always calm. So there could be a maelstrom around him, but he always was very calm and rational. And so I hopefully took some lessons from that. And I decided to write the book after I was fired and asked to testify before Congress about my firing, and I was limited in what I could say. It was frustrating that, the senators asked, well, was there any interference by Maine Justice? And I had to explain that it was outside the scope of what I was permitted to talk about by the ethics officers. And so I then, after that experience, I thought, well, the story has to be told. The record has to be set straight.
And then finally, the Senate Judiciary Committee is going to be investigating. Now you're free to talk about this, I assume. You plan to...
Everything that's in the book I can talk about has been cleared by Maine Justice, and I'm going to fully cooperate with the investigation. And hopefully that investigation that investigation will shed even more light on the conduct of the Trump Justice Department and increase the transparency, which is what the book's all about.
All right, well, thank you so much.
Oh, thank you.
Appreciate it.
Thank you, Jan.
So do you want me to go? Oh, come to the mic. I was going to be like Oprah out there. So does anyone have questions? The mic's right there. Or I can read you. Okay, we have someone getting up. We always appreciate the person who goes first. Yeah. While she's coming up there,
I thought you were walking out of the store for a second. So.
I was thinking, wow, this didn't go nearly as well as we thought it did.
Okay, so I'm an attorney, among other things, and I worked for the Food and Drug Administration and then the Environmental Protection Agency. The Environmental Protection Agency was under Reagan. It was 1980 to 1986, and it was so bad, I went to medical school. I just couldn't, if I had 6 lives, that would be one thing. But what went on at EPA under Reagan was awful. And my sense of what happened at DOJ under Trump was much worse. That people left, good people left. I assume they were replaced by more reliable people. The top of the Justice Department has all changed. But the bottom of the Justice Department, was it injured? Was it hurt? And does he have landmines in there for, if another Democrat is elected, if Biden is reelected, or has he placed people he trusts in positions that are supposed to be nonpartisan?
So with the Department of Justice, I'll talk first about the Southern District. No one from the Southern District resigned because of Trump, and so that has held steady. In the Department of Justice, the political people have all left and been changed by the Biden administration, by Merrick Garland, and so I don't think there's a huge risk of there being placed non-political people, and where you really have are people who have been career people their entire lives. Now, what happened when I was talking about the District of Columbia, when Jesse Liu left and Tim Shea came in, I mean, that was a shakeup. And so there were, I think, 4 attorneys who resigned from the cases they were working on, and that was the Roger Stone case and some other cases, because of the filings that were made by the office after Tim Shea came on board. And one person resigned from the department entirely. So there were some high-profile resignations in that situation.
Was that the Michael, I forget his last name, the general? The one who was...
Flynn. It was Roger Stone and
Michael Flynn.
Right, but I don't think the resignations were on the Flynn case. I think they were on the Stone case.
Oh, well, that could be.
But the damage that was done by the Trump Justice Department and by Bill Barr was the evisceration of the rule of law. That's the damage that's lasting. That's why people have lost confidence in the Department of Justice and in the FBI.
And the Supreme Court.
But the Supreme Court, right, is in a kind of a different category. But the damage that was done by Barr, we're still feeling, and that's why I think it's so vulnerable, because it frightens me. The prospect of a second Trump administration is really frightening, because all of the things that he did and tried to do when he was president will be repeated if there's a second administration, except he's going to be more successful in doing these things the second time around. And you were talking about the career people in government. And one of the things that I've read in the paper that Trump's advisors are talking about is a Schedule F. I don't know if people have...
I've heard about it.
So Schedule F is an executive order that will enable the president to more easily fire long-term, non-political career public servants, including the Department of Justice. And his advisors have said, and it could be upwards of 50,000 career employees could be fired under Schedule F. And his advisors have said, well, we won't have to fire nearly that number. We just need to fire enough so that it scares the others that they either do as they're told or lose their jobs. So who is going to stop Trump under that scenario?
Now he regards us as the enemy, the deep state. Thank you.
Thank you.
So thank you, first of all. Sorry, let me get my mask off. Thank you for writing the book. I think it's extremely important that this comes out. What really troubles me, though, a little bit, I've worked my entire career overseas, is that you described the investigations of Kerry, the investigations of different people, but what was not getting investigated on the other side, because nobody was referring those cases. And one of the key things I don't quite understand is, you know, you've got the Durham probe going on today, which what many would say this was really very much politically motivated. But we don't have any special counsel. We don't have any sort of commission. We don't have anybody actually investigating. I mean, you spoke up, but I'm sure there are many other offices where people didn't speak up or haven't spoken up or haven't written a book. And don't we need some sort of a process or a council or a commission to actually get to the bottom of what happened and have some accountability? Because what worries me is, you know, we don't know what else happened that was not investigated. We don't know what happened in all these other states where people are not so able to have agency to speak. And if we don't find that out soon, and I don't quite understand why Merrick Garland is not calling for that, or why Democrats are not calling for that, not even Democrats, but basically people believe in the rule of law. You know, we're headed exactly where a lot of the other countries that I've worked in have been. Because as you said, all you have to do is influence people. All you have to do is shift the incentives. And once you shift the incentives, it becomes very hard to go back. So that's my question for you is, yes, we speak publicly, but what mechanism, why aren't we talking about a mechanism to actually do a proper investigation of what happened at the Department of Justice and other departments?
Well, that's why I'm so hopeful about the Senate Judiciary Committee opening up an investigation based on what the incidents in my book. I welcome it. I'm going to cooperate fully with it, but I don't think for one second that the interference that I talk about only happened in the Southern District of New York. We know it happened in the District of Columbia. We saw it happen real time. You could read about it. And I'm sure that's not the only place it happened. So I agree with you that it needs to be a full vetting, a full investigation into all aspects of this.
But if we ever had the justification for some sort of a special counsel, this would be it. I mean, this is the issue, is we're going to have another election. That's going to disappear. And, you know, why isn't the Department of Justice itself actually, you know, to me, it seems very odd that you had these excesses, and in most organizations afterwards you would have some accountability, at least internal accountability. From the public's perspective, we don't hear anything. And I think the sort of onslaught of thing after thing after thing after thing begins to make people outside very cynical. And it's actually up to Merrick Garland not to just say, we have neither fear nor favor, but to actually do something concrete within the Department of Justice to say we're actually going to have an investigation of these.
Do you think that I mean, would you support that? Do you think there's a role that Merrick Garland could have in ordering some kind of investigation into what happened, you know, during the 4 years of the Trump administration? Is that important to the Justice Department to have that airing? And if so, why hasn't that happened?
Well, you know, let's stay tuned on this. I mean, you know, let Merrick Garland, you know, look at the evidence that's collected in connection with the Senate committee has asked for documents and emails and text messages. What the Southern District saw what the communications between Main Justice and the Southern District, but there was a curtain, down in front of the Department of Justice, Main Justice, and so we've never seen those internal communications. So, let's see how that plays out.
But they don't have subpoena power.
Exactly.
But I don't. They've requested the documents from the Department of Justice, and I
So
haven't
there's no
heard.
reason that he
I haven't
shouldn't.
heard that Merrick Garland is opposing that production.
All right, thank you. While we're waiting for someone else to come up, one thing I alluded to this, that you were recused from some of the Cohen case, for example. Oh, well, okay, go ahead. I was going to have one more question while we're waiting.
That's all.
Oh, Laura, this
So-
is a plant. You are holding in your hand.
I believed everything in the book but one thing, that there's no way you were at Temple on Kol Nidra night.
Oh, I
in
was
that.
I don't know anybody. Do people here know Temple Emmanuel in New York? So, we've been members there a long time. And the night that we found out that Lev Parnas and Igor Fruman, who were associates of Rudy Giuliani, were flying with one-way tickets out of the country to Frankfurt, Germany. It was the beginning of Kol Nidre in Temple Emmanuel. And, I always got seats in the back. It's a huge,
so you could leave. So you could leave.
well, but whether I was leaving or not, I always got him in the back. And so at least that night, I was grateful I got him in the back because I was able to take the call from the office because I knew they wouldn't be calling me. The head of the public corruption unit was calling, and I knew he wouldn't be calling on Kol Nidre unless there was
Something important.
good reason. Yeah.
But anyway, not my question. So
I think your time is up.
So you were one of three, I believe, prospective U.S. attorneys who Trump wanted to talk to before he nominated them. And you went to the White House, which was very unusual for the president to talk to prospective U.S. attorneys. Can you tell us anything about,
Well, I don't think it should have been that. Look, Senator Gillibrand wouldn't return my blue slip based entirely on the fact that I had met with the president. Okay. Now, I don't think that should have been a disqualification because, U.S. attorneys, meet with senators. They go through extensive discussions with the senators in their state. They often U.S. attorneys were friends with the president who nominated them, went to law school with the president who nominated them. If that's not disqualifying, then why should sitting down, for an interview with the president be disqualified? Now, if there was a pledge that you were required to make, then I could see that. Obviously, that's disqualifying. But if it's a normal interview, I don't see why that should have disqualified me. What did you think it should have disqualified?
No, I didn't think so. But what do you think?
Laura
Trump-
Loeb and I were in first year law school together, housemates.
2 years.
2 years.
2 years.
Yeah.
But what do you think Trump was after? Right? I mean, it wasn't just a normal interview. I mean, when he thought Morgenthau would never have brought charges against him because they were pals, do you think he was trying to size you up to see if you're going to be his pal? What do you think what do you think was in his mind?
Look, in the book, and I think what makes the book as compelling as it is that it's like deals with facts in a very granular way, and I don't speculate. I draw the inferences from the facts. So I don't know what was in the president's mind when he wanted me to come in for an interview, and it's an important district, and it could be that he wanted to establish a relationship. I do say that there was a time, a couple weeks into my my tenure, the president called me on my cell phone, and there was a brief conversation at that point. That was the only conversation I had with him when I was U.S. attorney, which I reported the conversation to the liaison at the AG's office. But I just try not to speculate.
He didn't really say anything in that conversation.
He congratulated me on good press I was getting.
Yeah. It's like,
That
it's
was
kind of an
important.
odd.
Thank you.
there one more, or I don't know. I don't want. All right. Well, so my question was, and maybe this is a good place if you have some more, someone please come up. But just to clarify this, so you were recused from the Cohen case because you had worked for the Trump campaign and you had contributed to Trump. But you say in the book you were wrong about Trump. And I think that a lot of people were. I mean, there were Republicans who thought he was going to, as you say, clean up his act. And there was a sense at the time when Trump went into the White House that, and I remember Ben Wittes wrote a lot about this, who's a legal reporter, that Republicans had a duty to try to restrain the damage that they thought Trump could possibly do. Did that factor into your mind at all? And when we think about people in the department, is there ever a possibility, like even with Durham doing the special counsel investigation, that they're also trying to do that, like behind the scenes, managing things, you know, the better than a hack or a loyalist could?
Yeah, no, as I admit in the book, I was completely wrong about Trump. I thought it was an act. I thought it was a populist act, and that when he got in, he would be transactional and be actually somebody who could reach across the aisle and make deals on a deal-by-deal basis with the Democrats. Turned out to be completely false. I was not the only one who thought that. But look, like many who stayed in their position despite misgivings, I took the assignment and I tried to keep my job because I thought it was best for the Southern District of New York and the country. And there are 220 outstanding assistant United States attorneys in the Southern District of New York, and none of them quit because of Trump, and they needed someone to lead the office.
All right. Well, on that note, thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you all. Thank you.